Apparently, I'm a threat to community standards just for owning a moving truck. On moving day, the HOA president, yes, that's a real title here, called the police, claiming my truck was blocking emergency access on a street so empty you could have rolled a bowling ball down it and not hit a thing. My son looked up at me and asked, "Dad, why does that lady already hate us?" At the time, I figured she was just another neighborhood busybody, the kind who thrives on control and gets a little too much joy from clipboard power. But as it turns out, I'd accidentally stumbled into something much bigger, something I didn't even realize was happening. I'd become the guy who asked the wrong questions about her operation. If you've ever poked a hornet's nest without meaning to, drop a comment, because this situation spiraled faster than I ever expected. My name's Logan Reed, and like any person with $500,000 burning a hole in their pocket, I thought buying lakefront property would mean peaceful mornings, quiet sunrises, and my son learning how to fish off our own dock. But as it turns out, the universe had other plans. My wife Emma kept saying, "Logan, this feels too good to be true." And honestly, she was absolutely right. But I'll get to that disaster in a minute. First, let me paint you a picture of what was supposed to be the best day of my life. One that quickly turned into something that felt like a cross between a bureaucratic nightmare and a reality TV show gone off the rails. If someone had told me buying a house would come with more drama than a soap opera, I might have just rented forever and called it a day. There I was, watching our moving truck pull up to our new cabin at Lakeside Meadows. Our 9-year-old son, Tyler, was bouncing with excitement, asking every 30 seconds when he could go swimming. Emma had that familiar look, the one she gets when I make a big financial decision, equal parts hopeful and nervous. And honestly, I was feeling pretty good about myself. $500,000 for actual lakefront property in this market? The realtor, Karen Mills, made it sound like I'd won the lottery. "Peaceful lakefront community," she said. "You'll love the neighbors," she said. What she didn't say was that one of those neighbors was about to make my life a living hell with the power of a clipboard and an attitude problem the size of Texas. But hey, for about 20 minutes, ignorance was bliss. Then she appeared. It was 8:30 in the morning. The movers were just starting to unload when I heard it. Sharp, deliberate clicks on the asphalt. Click, click, click. Like a metronome set to maximum authority. I turned around and there she was, Grace Perez, though I didn't know her name yet. She emerged from her house like she was about to audit my entire existence. Perfectly blow-dried hair at 8 a.m., full makeup like she was headed to a corporate board meeting, and a clipboard clutched in her hands like it was Excalibur, and she was the chosen one. The measuring tape hanging from her belt should have been my first red flag. Instead, I thought maybe she was one of those overly helpful neighbors coming to tell us where the best coffee shop was. Boy, was I wrong. "Excuse me," she said, and already, I could tell she wasn't excusing anything. "I'm Grace Perez, HOA President and Community Standards Enforcer for Lakeside Meadows." Community Standards Enforcer. Who even has a title like that? It sounds like a made-up job someone invents to justify bossing people around. She stared at our moving truck like it had personally insulted her ancestors. Then she started taking photos, dozens of them from every angle imaginable. I stood there thinking, asterisk lady, it's a truck. It's doing truck things. What's the problem? Asterisk, but Grace had problems with everything, as I was about to find out. She pulled out this massive handbook, like, seriously, the kind of book you'd use to prop up a wobbly table, and started flipping through it with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to find the page she wanted. "This is a violation of our emergency vehicle access protocol," she announced, like she was declaring war. I looked around. The street was wide enough for 3 cars. There was no emergency vehicle, no emergency of any kind, unless you count my rapidly rising blood pressure. "This is a first warning," she said, "but it will be documented in our violation log." And get this, she had pre-printed forms. This woman didn't just show up angry. She came prepared to ruin my day with the efficiency of a well-oiled bureaucratic machine. Tyler poked his head out of the car and asked, "Dad, who's the angry lady?" And honestly, the kid had a point. Emma came over, saw Grace scribbling furiously on her clipboard, and I could practically see her mentally calculating how much this move was going to cost us in ways we never expected. That's when Grace dropped the first real bomb. "Oh, and lake access requires a separate application process," she said. $200 fee. I just stared at her. "Wait, what?" "I bought lakefront property. Doesn't that include, access to the lake?" Grace gave me this condescending smile, the kind that probably took years of practice to perfect. "Things aren't always as simple as they seem, Mr. Reed," she said. Then she flipped through some papers and casually dropped my name, my purchase price, and what felt like every detail of my life. Previous owners learned to follow our procedures. Eventually. The way she said eventually sent chills down my spine. It wasn't the suggestion. It was a threat wrapped in polite language and delivered with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Irrigation accidents. Right. Just a wild coincidence that this happened the day after I started asking neighbors about their HOA experiences. The repair cost me $2,000, money Grace didn't offer to cover, even though her so-called sprinkler expertise somehow caused the problem in the first place. Emma was furious. Tyler was heartbroken that he couldn't use his room while we dried everything out. And I was starting to realize that Grace's idea of community management involved a lot more sabotage than I'd ever expected. 2 months after my first application, rejection number 2 arrived. This time, Grace claimed I needed 75% neighbor approval for the dock, a rule that had mysteriously never appeared in any of the original application materials. Fine. I'm stubborn. And Tyler kept asking about that fishing dock every single day. So I started going door to door, like I was running for mayor of Lakeside Meadows. What I discovered during my little campaign for dock approval was that Grace had turned our neighborhood into a fear-based dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. People were genuinely scared to talk to me. Some wouldn't even open their doors. Others would peek through the blinds, glance nervously toward Grace's house, and whisper their horror stories about sudden violation notices, arbitrary rule changes, and fees that seemed to appear out of nowhere like mushrooms after rain. The few brave souls who did speak up painted a picture of systematic intimidation that would make a mob boss proud. Linda Wilson told me she'd been fined for having non-conforming garden gnomes. Dave got a violation notice for parking his car in his own driveway for 13 hours. Apparently, the limit was 12. And everyone, had stories about friends or neighbors who'd given up and moved away rather than deal with Grace's ever-expanding list of community standards. Then came rejection number 3. And this is where Grace really went off the rails. She now wanted a $2,000 special lake impact assessment, money that would supposedly go into some vague community enhancement fund that no one could actually explain or account for. But that wasn't even the worst part. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from Sterling and Associates. Grace had hired a lawyer over a dock permit. A lawyer. The letter threatened a lawsuit for unauthorized construction and property damage to community assets before I'd even built anything. I stood there reading it, completely baffled. What unauthorized construction? What property damage? I hadn't hammered a single nail or moved a single piece of lumber. But in Grace's world, even thinking about building a dock was apparently enough to trigger legal action. Emma looked at that letter and said what we were both thinking. Logan, this woman is completely insane. At that point, I'd already spent $1,200 on applications and repairs, $800 on the environmental study, and another $2,000 on the flood damage from Grace's irrigation accident. And now I was staring down the barrel of potential legal fees if she decided to follow through on her threats. We're talking about $6,000 just to maybe get permission to build a dock on property I thought I already owned. Tyler was starting to think I was lying to him because I kept promising the dock was coming soon. And Emma's stress level had climbed so high she was doing that thing where she cleans the kitchen counters over and over when she's worried about money. That's when I decided to take a more direct approach. I walked down to the water, just stepped onto my property line, and put my feet in the lake I was supposedly being denied access to. Tyler was right behind me, asking, "Dad, are we really going to swim now?" And that's when Grace's voice cut through the air like a rusty chainsaw. "I wouldn't take another step if I were you. I turned around, but here's the weird part. Grace wasn't there. Her voice was crystal clear, but she was nowhere in sight. Tyler grabbed my arm and whispered, "Dad, where's her voice coming from?" Turns out, Grace had installed an outdoor speaker system she could activate from her house, because apparently, spying on neighbors through binoculars wasn't creepy enough. She needed the ability to deliver ominous warnings from an invisible location, like some kind of suburban Big Brother. When she finally came out, camera in hand, I realized this woman had turned neighborhood surveillance into a full-time hobby. But instead of calling the cops this time, Grace got creative with her revenge. Anonymous complaints started flooding the county office, reports that I was violating environmental regulations, destroying wetlands, and harassing elderly residents. County officials kept calling me, asking why I was allegedly terrorizing my neighbors. Grace had figured out that bureaucracy could be turned into a weapon, and she was launching a full-scale paper war on my reputation. But that speaker incident was the last straw for Emma. I came home one evening to find her packing bags. Not just hers, Tyler's, too. "I can't watch you destroy our family over water access," she said. And man, that hit harder than any HOA fine ever could. Tyler was crying, confused about why Mom was upset and why we couldn't just swim like normal people. And I stood there realizing that my fight for property rights was turning into the exact opposite of what I'd wanted for my family. "Emma, give me one more week," I begged. "Just 1 week to figure this out. If I can't make progress, I'll drop the whole thing." She looked at me with those eyes, the ones that said she'd heard promises like this before, but she packed Tyler's favorite stuffed animal and headed to her sister's place 2 hours away. Suddenly, my beautiful lakefront house felt like the loneliest place on earth. Tyler's goodbye hug lasted about 10 seconds longer than usual. And when Emma's car disappeared around the corner, I realized I might be fighting for a piece of property that would mean nothing if I lost my actual family in the process. That's when I decided to channel my inner detective and figure out what the hell was really going on with this lake situation. I took a personal day, something I almost never do, and drove to the county clerk's office with coffee and determination. The clerk, a sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, remembered the Perez family from way back. "Oh, honey," she said when I mentioned Grace. "That family went through some hard times back in the 1960s. She pulled out files that looked older than I was, original contracts from 1963, when Grace's father, Henry Perez, was forced to sell the family land after some kind of economic disaster. These weren't copies or digital scans. These were the real documents, yellowed with age, with actual signatures and coffee stains from decades ago. And every single one of them, every lakefront property sale, had the same phrase written right in the deed. Perpetual riparian rights included. Perpetual. As in forever. As in no HOA, no association, no community group could ever take away water access that had been legally guaranteed back when Grace was probably still in diapers. Mrs. Thompson explained that riparian rights, fancy legal term for lake access, can't be revoked by future organizations. It's like constitutional law for property owners. If your deed says you have lake access, then you have lake access. Period. No amount of HOA bureaucracy can override a legal right established 60 years ago. I sat there reading those documents, and suddenly, Grace's entire operation started making sense, in the worst possible way. She knew about these rights. She had to know. This was her family's land, her father's contracts, her inheritance of local history. Which meant every fee she'd collected, every dock she'd denied, every family she'd driven away from the lake, it was all based on a lie she'd been telling for a decade. This woman had turned community management into a straight-up con game, charging people for access to something they already legally owned. Talk about a business model that would make a used car salesman blush. Walter Hayes turned out to be my secret weapon in this investigation. Turns out, this retired professor had been doing his own research for years, but he'd been too intimidated by Grace to do anything with it. "Logan," he said when I showed up at his door with the county documents, "I've been waiting for someone like you for years." He led me down to his basement, which looked like the private research library of someone who'd spent their whole career studying local history. Behind a bookshelf that probably weighed more than my car, Walter had hidden boxes of documents that Grace's father had tried to destroy before he died. Personal letters, newspaper clippings, even some of Henry's private correspondence with the original buyers back in 1963. Grace had been planning this since she was a kid, Walter told me, showing me a handwritten letter from teenage Grace vowing to restore the family legacy and make sure the lake belongs to the right people again. This wasn't just about money or control. This was a decades-long revenge fantasy played out on an entire community. The woman had turned neighborhood management into her personal therapy session, and we were all paying for her daddy issues. The financial investigation was where things got really ugly. I filed a public records request for HOA financial documents, something any community member can do if they know how to ask. What came back was more damning than anything I could have imagined. $240,000 in lake maintenance fees collected over 10 years, with exactly zero spent on actual lake maintenance. Not a single dollar. The money had been transferred to something called the Perez Heritage Preservation Fund, which sounded official, until you realized it was just Grace's personal bank account with a fancy name. She'd been running shell companies, creating fake maintenance contracts, and basically turning the HOA into her private ATM machine, all while charging neighbors for the privilege of not using amenities she never actually provided. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't poor bookkeeping. This was systematic fraud, so bold and creative it would make white-collar criminals jealous. Meanwhile, Grace was escalating her campaign against me. Those anonymous complaints? Just the beginning. Reports started showing up at my consulting firm about my unprofessional behavior and neighborhood disputes. Mysterious callers were expressing concerns about my character, suggesting clients might want to reconsider working with someone who causes trouble in his own community. I lost a $15,000 contract because a potential client got spooked by rumors of my aggressive behavior toward elderly volunteers. Grace had turned character assassination into an art form. She was using community connections like weapons against anyone who dared question her authority. The woman was playing chess while I was playing checkers, and she'd been practicing those moves for a decade while I was just realizing there was even a game happening. But here's the thing about investigators. We're stubborn. And we don't like being lied to. And Grace had just made both of those traits very relevant to her future. Walter and I spent hours in his basement, organizing evidence and planning what he called strategic documentation. We had historical proof, financial records, legal precedents, and a growing mountain of evidence that Grace's entire operation was built on lies. But Walter had one final piece of advice before we moved forward. "Logan," he said, "this isn't just about a doc anymore. It's about justice for everyone she's hurt."